In this video, I'm going to be responding to BooFire191, who seems to have a bit of a memory loss when it comes to the relationship between the United States of America and its people. 1. This is going to be a video response to BooFire191's video about Antifa. In it, he seems to have a memory loss on the relationship between the United States government and its people. Now, as full disclosure, I am not a member of Antifa, and I do have many criticisms of the organization myself. However, the ones he gives in the video are simply wrong. Now, as usual, I'm going to Gordian knot this whole video. In other words, I'm going to cut straight to the heart of the argument rather than nitpick every single little thing. He starts off by saying that Antifa is a communist organization. Well, actually, Antifa is loosely made up of people from various political ideologies, a large portion of them actually being anarchists. Many of them are leftists. The vast majority of the organization are leftists, but of different stripes. Some of them are even just plain liberals that are radical in their opposition to, Nazis and gas chambers. Now, they're only generally considered to be communists by people who don't really understand them. Now, he laments that they commit acts of violence against the Nazis, which are doing the same thing. He seems to just completely leave out of context the fact that the right-wing groups which Antifa are protesting are committing acts of violence as well, and this is pretty dishonest, if not an accident due to some kind of a memory loss. It seems like violence is only bad when leftists do it, but it's okay when rightists do it. In a strange moment, he refers to them as left-wing extremist terrorists and LARPers. Well, they can't be both. Are they just posers, or are they a real threat? Now, this is what happens when you mix insults with arguments. In the case of the G20 riots, he forgets that the violence by the Black Bloc, and not just the Black Bloc, but a lot of people who were not even a part of the organization, were violent against the actual meeting because of the violence that the countries involved in carry out against other people. When you deprive people of food or deprive them of medicine and clean water because they can't afford it, many people would consider that to be an act of violence. So in many cases, the people who are there are being violent against an act of violence that is being carried out. Again, another piece of context that's being removed. Then he attacks them for, quote, starting a riot at Berkeley, at the free speech rally. Of course, he omits that the rally wasn't actually about free speech, but about hate speech. This is, again, another significant piece of context removed from the incident in question. If you probably can see a theme here. And then, as just a part of his style, he goes off into the Star Wars Empire, which, really doesn't have anything to do with Antifa, but is used to illustrate the point that he's trying to make in the video. Now, he compares the United States today to the Empire in Star Wars. Now, at no point did Antifa declare themselves to be the rebels from Star Wars, but I get the point he's trying to make. He's trying to make the comparison to illustrate the point. He notes all the crimes that the Empire's committed that the United States government hasn't. Except the problem is that they have genocide, the ongoing wars against countries around the world, and the fact that these wars have been going on for almost 100 years, including the founding of the United States on 2 genocides, that of Native Americans and African Americans, or more Africans to be specific, just seems to completely escape his mind. In fact, the U.S. is an extremely militarized society, which he says is not like the Empire. Well, actually, it frankly quite is, if you just have not noticed the militarized police that have risen in the last few years. Not just killing other countries in the millions, like Iraq and Afghanistan together, being about 3 million people dead, unless that just doesn't count as killing, but militarized police at home. It seems he doesn't even bother to check what has been going on in the world. As for slavery, there is a slave system that has been set up in Libya as a result of the U.S. proxy war in the country. So yes, there is slavery, and it is the United States government's fault. They're the ones that destabilized and destroyed the country just to get rid of a guy who didn't hand over his oil to his country's oil over to the United States. Yes, that did happen. When you destabilize and destroy something, you are responsible for what happens as a result. And he seems to say that there's no strict authoritarian laws, unlike the Empire, which does have them. Of course, he must have completely forgotten about the Patriot Act, or many of the draconian laws around quote-unquote security that have been passed through the government since 9/11, assuming, of course, he's even old enough to remember 9/11. Perhaps he doesn't remember it because he's not old enough. He seems to have completely missed the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights is routinely violated. He goes on to say, well, Trump can't do this or Trump can't do that because the Bill of Rights and the Constitution won't allow it. He uses the example of the travel ban. He couldn't get that through, so therefore Trump can't do anything that violates the Constitution or people's freedoms. As long as you completely ignore all the things that have gone through that violate people's freedoms, that do violate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that have been going on long before Donald Trump was even in office. Most of it starting, or at least the latest contingent of it, starting after 9/11. So he just completely pretends they've never happened, like police being able to carry out warrantless searches that have now been ruled illegal, and the removal of your right to remain silent. I mean, he just pretends these things never happened. These are court rulings that went through the legal system, which he claims would never allow it, and that Congress would never approve something that violated human rights, which it certainly has. Now, the real perplexing thing about his whole video is that he goes on about how these human rights abuses can't happen because Congress would stop it. He seems to have an awful lot of faith in the same organization which is responsible for the deaths of quite a lot of people through war, but domestically as well, allowing many crimes. Keep in mind that many of these so-called organs to protect people's rights were pretty okay with slavery and pretty okay with mass lynchings of black people. They weren't even real issues to them. So he seems to think that it just never happened. So I think he's just putting this in the context of his own very limited experience of the real world, where these things, by, I guess, the logic of his memory, just don't exist. You know, I get the point of using Star Wars as a way of explaining this situation. The problem is that in describing what the Empire is and comparing it to the United States, to show how the United States is not like the Empire, he's forgetting that it actually is like the Empire. He's just literally ignoring the crimes that the real-life Empire actually does. Antifa is far from what he claims. Antifa is a reaction to something that exists. Antifa didn't just show up one day and decide, we are going to riot. They're rioting at something very specific, the rise of white nationalism in the country, which is a very real thing that has happened. But maybe in his mind, it just never happened. But it certainly has. It seems as though his opinion is very much detached from the real world. Perhaps he's not experienced enough of the real world to know what is going on. One can have an interpretation of what is happening, but it's important for someone to actually know what is and what is not happening. And it seems that the crimes of the US Empire are something that he just doesn't see. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.